Phil Andrews, CEO of USA Fencing. How are you?
Not bad, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Listen, thanks very much for being the person to do our inaugural Leaders in Sport interview. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
it's it's a, it's a real privilege to speak to you, and I'm really pleased that you're the person to be doing this with us. So I'm going to, if you're all right with it, I'm going to jump straight in,
Go.
um, ask you a little bit about your backstory. So, you grew up near Chelmsford, I think, in
I
a,
did.
a,
I
a small town in England.
I did. I moved all over. So I lived on the Isle of Wight. I lived in London. I lived in Coventry, Sheffield. My mother actually now lives in Morecambe.
Wow.
Just outside Bristol as well, and Glastonbury. So I've been around a little bit.
You have.
People ask me where I call home, and that's Essex. I spent the
Okay.
majority of my time there. I guess the longest period of time there, in a small town called Southwold-on-Ferrers, which is sort of a triangle between Chelmsford, Southend, and Basildon.
Okay.
But yeah, that's exactly probably what you expected when you heard CEO of USA Fencing was a guy from South Woodham.
Right. Yeah. Which, coming from Sheffield and coming from England was a place that, frankly, I'd never heard of. But yeah, now I have. But you've obviously bounced around in your private life and growing up, but you've also bounced around professionally, I'm guessing, as a result. Starting in ice hockey, then moving through student hospitality, and then through the Olympics, and then into the USA weightlifting, and now USA fencing. Can you, I mean, unpack that journey, that incredible sounding journey for us?
I have a very good friend who keeps asking me when I'm going to go and tell her that I'm joining the circus, because of the exact journey that you're
Because
talking
that's
about.
next, right?
Exactly, and there's one of our business partners at USA Weightlifting in the coaching education area was Cirque du Soleil, so I shared that story with most of their people as well. But look, ice hockey was my passion. You live in Sheffield, so you know the Sheffield Steelers. I worked
Very
in
well.
that same league for the Basingstoke Bison, and also for the Coventry Blaze. And there's a lot of credit I give, particularly to the Coventry Blaze, in things I learned in how to efficiently run small sports businesses, small to medium sports businesses,
Okay.
and do really well with it on very lean staffing. Mark Bernard, who gave me my first job in sport, is now the deputy general manager of the Chicago Blackhawks and looks after their minor league affiliations, meaning the American Hockey League and East Coast Hockey League.
Yeah.
For those who don't know ice hockey, that's where a lot of the Canadians and Americans who end up playing for Sheffield or Nottingham or Belfast in the UK end up coming from. It's my belief he took some of those ideas from the UK over there, and he won AHL Executive of the Year, I think, 2 years in, and after that won two Stanley Cup rings. So, you know, British ice hockey's got at least two people here in the US where you can legitimately say ideas have been picked up from British ice hockey and put into use into American sport. But yeah, I ended up moving out of sport for a little while, working for Unite Group, who, if you're in the UK and you look up near any major university, you'll see this blue square with Unite in it. That's the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
company. And then ended up moving to London with them, which was their biggest market, and then joined David Lloyd Leisure, who run
Yeah.
health clubs, racket clubs, very high-end ones. Um, a little bit like Lifetime Fitness for anyone listening in the US, as a regional interim manager. My job there, if you've ever seen the George Clooney movie, I think it's called Up in the Air, where he's based out of Omaha and goes around and starts firing people.
Yeah.
That
I've
was
seen
my
that film.
job. Yeah, and then so I didn't last very long doing that. It wasn't really my cup of tea. And also my another dear friend of mine, when I told him I was working for a gym, told me the following response, which was "What as?" question mark a weight question mark. So I decided between those two factors that was a role probably not for me, and then ended up at UEL, and that was a really great place to be. I ended up managing most of the things that the university does that are money generation, revenue generation for the university, but are
Ah,
not educating people. And that
okay.
led into the Olympic Games.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Paralympic Games, and that's yeah, we ran the High Performance Training Center for Team USA in London, and that's how I met all of the US folks, and ended up as a souvenir. Most people buy those little Big Bens that cost about £5, so I guess my retail value was about £3.50.
Yeah, yeah.
Ended up over here in the US, and 10 years later with USA Weightlifting and a cup of coffee running the IWF, which is the Worldwide Federation for Weightlifting.
Hmm.
Later, I'm now been at US Fencing for just a shade short of 3 years. So it's been an interesting and certainly winding journey across that time.
It has. And would you say, how do I phrase this politely? How much of that was intentional, do you think, and how much of it was kind of, I don't know, bad judgment, good judgment? Was there a game plan?
Not really. I mean, certainly, I'd say more so now than there was. Look, I got into the professional ice hockey world because when the NHL locked out, I rung a group called Hockey Stars of Hope, who are touring the UK, and said, "Hey, would you like to play the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam University?" And to my surprise, they said yes. And that's how I got involved with them and their tour around the UK, and that's how I got to know everybody in the ice hockey business in the UK, and that's how Bernie offered me the job at Basingstoke, and then Basingstoke was a very small team. It was essentially the off ice staff was just me. I actually ended up hiring the coach, signing the first few players that year. Um, and running a lot to do with the rink operation as well. And bear in mind, I was very young. I couldn't manage my way out of a paper bag at that point. So, um, and then Coventry came a calling at that time. Coventry were top of the league, arguably the best run business. They were on the field of play, on the ice, beating the likes of Sheffield and Nottingham, who had
Yeah,
much bigger budgets, and they're incredibly well run by a gentleman named Andy Buxton, and a coach named Paul Thompson, as a lady there named Sally Mayett, all of whom were outstanding. Um, again, when I left there, and that was more because I lost the ability to watch the sport I really liked. I was at every game, but I wasn't at every game, if that makes any sense. And it was a
yeah,
wonderful experience. We won a couple of championships. I made some great friends, and like I say, I learned a lot from that group. And the one job I've ever just commercially applied for really is the Unite Group job, and I ended up going there and again learned a lot about change management. Still have great friends who work for that business and
yeah,
worked across the UK and got promoted a number of times. It was awesome. UEL happened partly because of the amount. I had the right skill set, and same thing for David Lloyd that they needed, and the commercial mindset that they needed, which was different to academia.
yeah.
And then, since then, it's been sort of a journey of left turns,
Hmm.
of seeing what happens next and what I get approached about. And certainly, look, I certainly keep my name out there, and through colleagues at both USA Weightlifting and now USA Fencing, I've been lucky enough to have opportunities like this to tell some of that story.
Yeah,
But it's I've learned that the rule in life is expect the unexpected. Now, if you'd gone back to me at 14 years old and said you will one day run the sport of fencing in the United States, I would have looked at you like you had seven heads. Um, and it's because it just not it wouldn't have occurred to me.
yeah,
And who knows what the next 20 years holds. But
absolutely.
it's now been well over a decade in US Olympic and Paralympic sport, yet I'm still under 40.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
let's see where the next 20 years of my career runs, and who I'm sitting down with in 20 years and saying, well, there's this bizarre story of US fencing to this next thing. So, and it could be, but it's
Absolutely.
certainly
Lots to
not
do.
not horribly planned. More planned now perhaps than it was, but
Yeah,
more senior level roles and so forth. But it certainly. I had a lot of luck. I had a lot of people who noticed me in the right positions and were great enough to give me a chance. If Mark Bernard had never picked up the phone and said, "Would you come to Basingstoke?" I wouldn't be sitting here
where
today.
would you be?
If
Absolutely.
yeah, I legitimately don't know. I actually started my own business in the music industry before all of that, so I might have been in that world.
Yeah,
Um, but it was definitely something different. And without Mark's call, I'm probably not sitting here. Without then Andy and Sally approaching me and coming up to Coventry Blaze, I'm almost certainly not capable of sitting here. So, there's, and then everything else came from that. Without Unite, I would have never been in UEL. Without
Yeah,
UEL, I would have never been in the US Olympic and Paralympic movement. Without USA Weightlifting, I would have never been at the IWF. And without both of
yeah,
those, I would have never been at USA Fencing.
absolutely.
So, that life is all about choosing to embrace those experiences and then choosing to listen to people who have got great ideas and great ways of working, whether they be from within your industry or not.
Yeah,
And keeping in touch with those people and treating them well.
absolutely. You, it's interesting. There is a quote that I love from you, which is on the surface of it sounds obvious, but it very much fits with kind of that story, that backstory of yours. And that is, if you want to do something, ask. So
Correct.
again, sounds like an obvious statement, but can you? And I think that quote was from your interview with Authority. Um, to me,
Right.
that reflects kind of you very humbly explain how you've traveled through your career. But I don't think anybody gets to where you are without kind of taking that bold mindset. Can you
Yeah.
give me examples where you've needed to use that approach, and kind of how it's worked for you?
Look, I think when you think about the ass concept, right? It's a lot of that comes down to. This is going to sound a little odd, but we're all salespeople in some way, shape, or form, right? Whether it says sales in your job title or not, you're always selling a concept. You're selling your sport. You're selling you're selling sponsorship. You're selling event registrations. You're selling your reputation.
Yeah,
And ultimately that comes down to asking. And asking doesn't mean you're asking everybody for money. Sometimes you are. We've got a philanthropic foundation, and in that place, we're asking people for money. We're asking people for money to contribute to a mission, sure, but ultimately we're asking people for money.
mhm,
But look, especially when you run smaller sports, niche sport organizations like a USA Fencing, look, we're the fastest growing since Paris, sure, but we're still relatively small in this country compared to the likes of ice hockey, soccer, football. I apologize.
sure.
Baseball, football, as in hand egg, and rugby with pads. And it's we're small. And so you have to ask. Here's a great example of we went from 12 to 6 in media value during the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris. A lot of that was because we asked. When we won medals, we were going to CNN, to ABC, to Good Morning America, to CBS This Morning, to the Today Show, and we were asking for that coverage. We were not
Yeah,
waiting for them to come to us. So that's a good example of that. Learning about what other people are doing. We've done a really, what I would like to say, good job of supporting and expanding our collegiate opportunities
mhm,
in USA Fencing. Where did we learn that? We learned that from USA Triathlon. And we're
yeah,
happy to learn that from USA Triathlon. We feel like we've improved it, or at very least tweaked it for what we need at USA
yeah,
Fencing. But that's how we got there. We asked how they did it, how it worked. We listened with interest and we adapted it for us. And, the very start of my career came down to asking the NHL players if they play the University of Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam University Bears. That's where I started by asking
yeah,
a question. And you have to be prepared when you ask questions that sometimes the answer will be no, and sometimes it will be a lot of silence. But a lot of it is about asking the right questions, whether that be where you want to go, what you want to learn about, asking someone for a coffee. I don't think I've had a formal mentor in my life,
hmm,
but there's been some people who have really been mentors for me because I've asked them a ton of questions and they've been happy to give me the time of day to answer them.
absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, um, let's drill down into your leadership style. Um, across three NGBs, you've transformed culture through integrity, transparency, and empathy. How would you define your core management style today?
I think, yeah, that's an evolution, right, Mark? That you're constantly learning, and if you're not, you're in the wrong mindset or wrong job. I'm a better people manager or leader of organizations, I would like to hope, than I was 3 years ago when I joined
Yeah,
USA Fencing. I would hope, I certainly hope I'm better than 5 or 10 years ago when I joined USA Weightlifting. And I'm definitely better than 20 years ago when I was like, how do I get out of this paper bag? Um, and each of those times I've had attributes I've learned and moved on from. There's a great TED talk by a friend of mine called Che Wang, which is called I think it's called the Confessions of a Recovering Micromanager. And it's so accurate. There was a time when I needed to dictate what the I or the cross of the T was.
interesting.
And what I've learned is support and by all means lead from the front, but lead from the front in a way that's supportive to your team.
Yeah,
Listen to your team. Little things like wishing everybody on your team a happy birthday, remembering the day that they joined USA Fencing is very important. But also, what do they need? Where do they want to go? Where can I help them as people, not just as how do you get to the X's and O's of the job that we're doing?
yeah,
The biggest compliments I've had is Brad Sahorsky, who you know well.
I do.
Brad worked for me at weightlifting. He went over to lacrosse, and I wasn't mad at him. He went to an organization that could teach him a thing or two that was much larger, that provided an opportunity I could never do so. And I remember getting that phone call, and I think you thought I'd be a little upset, and I certainly was upset. But this is bad news for our organization. It's great news for Brad Sahorsky.
Mm.
And sure enough, we kept in touch, and I actually got asked by an organization who was looking at Brad whether they should hire him, and my response was, yes, you should before I do. Um, and about 3 months later, I kept my word. So I think that's where I find complimentary about our culture. The other thing is, learning about how culture comes from within. Um, I used to set the culture, um, and
Okay.
now I'm part of setting the culture. I might lead us to that, but it really has to come from within. At USA Fencing, we have a cultural contract, and everybody made it together in November of 22. We're just about to review it at a staff retreat in September of 25.
Hmm.
And that cultural contract, everyone gets it when they walk through the door. That's what they're asked to abide by. And it's a set of
Okay.
behaviors. It's nothing about how we're going to make fencing the next biggest sport. That's in our strategic plan. That's in our operational plans. This is about how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to treat our volunteer leadership, how we're going to treat our stakeholders, how we're going to treat our members. It's about behaviors. And that's been so important and a really big part of what we do. So look, it's an evolution. I'll probably be a different, and I hope better, people manager in 5 years than I am today, but it's been a lot of learning to get there and a lot of learning about what's important to different people, how to develop them. And, again, the biggest compliment you can get is when that seat shows up in reality with a Brad, a Jess Saxon who recently joined us and openly told me I'm joining us partly because of my presence here. Jess was an athlete for USA Weightlifting. So again, seeing that evolution where somebody was, effectively in most businesses would be a customer,
Hmm.
um, and came through, competed for Team USA, and then has done really well in her professional legal career, and then joined us in a legal role here, but in
Okay.
part because of the people.
Yeah.
And that, that was a tremendous compliment. And we see people coming in from other NGBs wanting to work at USA Fencing. And that's again, it's great. That's what we want to see. That's what we're seeing from that is people talking about our culture from internal positions
Yeah.
and people saying, I want to work in that culture. And
Yeah.
again, that's not just me, that's our entire senior leadership team, that's our entire base team as well, because everybody has to play a part in that. At weightlifting, I was much more about this is where we're going. By the way, here is the behaviors that we're going to display, which works. It does. It's better than not doing that work at all.
Yeah.
But that's what I learned between the two to do much better.
And do you think that? your, again, going back to your backstory, do you think that, because to me it sounds like you're a guy who's been involved at every operational level. So you have been kind of at the coalface as much as you've been a strategic decision maker. Do you think your takeaways from your years of experience being plugged into operations has helped you understand what it is to be an employee and be part of a team? Or do you look for that kind of inspiration elsewhere?
I mean, yes and no. I think it's helpful that I've been at the rock face. I've been in small organizations that you know, there is a degree to which I put my own back into it. I think that there's dangers though. The first danger is I've actually been a CEO now for well over a decade.
Mm.
So I've been leading organizations, and oftentimes I've had to be an operator in those positions as well as a strategic leader because of the size of the organization. So here at USA Fencing, we don't have a CMO or a CRO or a
Okay.
CCO. So in other words, the person who's leading revenue generation
Hmm.
and particularly sponsorship generation. So that's fallen on my shoulders largely. So that's meant I've needed to do that work. You know, similarly, when we launched the USA Weightlifting Foundation, we brought in some, or relaunched it, I should say. We brought in an outside provider, and they did well. But ultimately, it meant that I needed to be our primary fundraising person
Yeah.
um, for a time there. So it's certainly times when I've had to be that operational individual. But at the same time, there's also a sense of the last time I was an event director was, you know, about a decade ago. So who knows more about events, me or Glenn Hollingsworth, who leads our events team? And I can tell you right away, it's definitely Glenn. So it's yeah, and so you can be as much as you can a partner as long as you realize that you know the guy at the rock face probably knows a thing or two more than I do about the operation
Hmm.
of that unit. You know, similarly, we have this wonderful sports performance team led by Kate Riesinger. You know, Kate's areas run really well for years. My job is to move things out of her way, let her do her business. Um,
Okay.
so it's balancing that between putting your back into it and leading from the front and being a part of the working team, but also realizing you've got great people that you employed for a good reason
Yeah.
and to let them do their business, to let them cook, for want of better terminology. So it's certainly a lot of balance. That's again one thing I've had to learn, perhaps more than I would like to admit, over the years is how to get that balance right, and that's where
Yeah.
experience teaches you that.
Okay. So just to unpack that a little bit, you often emphasize integrity in decision making. Can you walk us through a specific moment, either in weightlifting and the challenges therein, or fencing, where that principle guided you through a tough call?
Yeah, look, I think that becomes a core value, right? It becomes more of a how do we do business? When you know, when we think about integrity, I think about things like transparency and honesty. And again, y- my philosophy here is if you give people the same information, they're likely to come to similar conclusions or at least understand why you did. And I think I apply that more to membership. I think for me, it's more of internally, I don't really think too much about integrity because if you've hired the right people, you don't need to.
Yeah.
You know, the expectation in our world is that, you know, we think about the member experience, we think about what's good for our business, we think about what's good for our coaches and our athletes, and that sort of 360-degree stakeholder group. And indeed, even our annual review process follows that of we look for external feedback and internal feedback on each of our individuals for those
Okay.
annual reviews, including, by the way, me.
Yeah.
So you know, I don't worry about it too much there. For me, you know, our sort of the charging headlong into integrity comes down a lot to how we treat issues like athlete safety, doping, results manipulation. Now in a collegiate world here at fencing that we didn't have at weightlifting, you know, potential recruitment manipulation for NCAA. You've been involved in watching College Connect, so you understand some of those regulations.
Yeah.
But you know, for me, integrity is it comes down to honesty, transparency. You can certainly always tell bad news with the, if you like, the silver lining of that bad news, but you got to tell the bad news.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
here's a working and very current example. We just changed a policy that affects significantly a very small minority of our population. Part of the reason they were accepting, I think will be the best word, of that policy change is we've been honest the whole time with them. This is where we are so far. We think this might change. We don't exactly know when.
Hmm.
And then, sure enough, when that drops into their inbox to say this change is happening, they're not surprised. They're not happy about it, but they're not surprised.
Yeah, so it's the whole kind of the managing expectations and being true to your beliefs, to your culture. That's kind of that sees you through those sorts of challenges. Is that right?
I think
I
that's right.
dropped
I
out
think
now.
that's a fair reflection. And again, you learn over time. You make it better over time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so in terms of mentors, I'm guessing you don't have a single mentor, but instead a network of advisors. So, including, for example, your CEO advisory group at USA Fencing
Yep.
that you pull on. How does that collective model inform your decisions rather than kind of having, an individual stood by your side? How does that
You
work for
know,
you?
and again, it's managing that whole group and listening to that whole group and bringing ideas forward from that whole group. And one of the things I think I've got relatively good at over the years is hearing an idea over here and an idea over here and figuring out how those both might apply to what we're doing, or a
Mm,
problem over here and an idea over here that might find a solution. Um, and sometimes, innovation can go too far. I'm definitely an innovator and a change maker by nature. And so as a result, that can go a little far in time. But look, there's been some people, as I mentioned earlier, I've never formally had a mentor-mentee relationship actually in my entire life, but there's a lot of people who have acted in a role of mentor to me without really ever being asked.
mm,
Partly because I'm just watching and learning from what they do, or partly because they've given me enough of their time where they might be in that category, or partly because they've really helped me explore a particular issue, and therefore they've really had an impact in what we do.
yeah,
And I can name probably 25 people who've played those sort of roles for me over time, because part of it as well is I've acted as a mentor, and sometimes informally and sometimes formally for folks. And one of my largest piece of advice is go and find other mentors, because it's first of all, my story, as you've heard, is slightly difficult to replicate. But so but also, the other issue is don't just learn from one person, because otherwise you're going to be a carbon copy of that person. And I think, going out there and finding other people, like let's use that grad example of lacrosse, of going and learning from Mark at lacrosse and others there. It's tremendous. I see the difference in Brad,
yeah.
in those couple of years he spent there, talking to different people, learning from different people. Another one that I've worked with for a long time, Susie Sanchez, is now at USA Cycling. She was at USA Weightlifting. Same thing. I see massive difference in her change between USA Weightlifting and USA Cycling in a very positive way.
Hmm.
But I also take pride in I worked with those two individuals for a very long time, and have been part of their success. And someday, one or both might move on past me in their career, and that is okay.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay. And so let's get into kind of numbers here a little bit. At USA Weightlifting, and you tripled the membership during your tenure.
There
And
or
at
thereabouts.
USA Fencing, you've hugely boosted it, and obviously you're just getting started. What are the core elements of your growth playbook?
I think you've heard a lot about listening and bringing ideas together, and that's a true marker. I think one of the issues in national governing bodies that we've seen historically is that we emphasize G for governing, and that's a big part of it. It is. You do set the rules for the United States of America, or GB as the case may be, and you do need to operate and serve that membership. So first of all, you need to retain. So that comes down to being a very much a service-based organization. The easiest way to retain to get more customers is to up your retention rate,
Hmm.
because essentially national governing bodies typically they'll especially youth-based ones like USA Fencing, less the case for USA Weightlifting. They will have a renewal rate of somewhere between 60 and 80% of folks. So in other
Okay.
words, if you let's say you have 30,000 members or whatever the number is, 40,000 members, you're generating 20% of that, so that would be with 6,000 new members per year just to stay still.
Yeah.
So you've got to up that number. So, one of the things we did at US Weightlifting was to put in place auto renewals, which hadn't happened before. We did that at US Fencing too. We did monthly memberships, and those helped as well
Okay.
with the way that we were retaining and growing our revenue and our membership base. And then ultimately remembering two things. One is what's the macro environment? So what's happening around the sport? In weightlifting, the big thing we have is CrossFit. And there's no way in cold earth that we would have grown that sport in the way that we did without the sport of CrossFit coming alongside us because of the TV exposure that they brought, that the fact that so many more people in so many more places have been able to pick up a barbell and use it in the last, now probably 10 to 15 years than they
Yeah.
did before. That was huge. And then embracing that growth too. That was a lot of how we monetized coaching education, was educating folks who were not necessarily coaches of weightlifters day to day.
Pure
They were
weightlifters. Yeah.
coaches of, yeah, they were CrossFitters, or they just wanted to get better at lifting, or they came in and they were in an NCAA school or an NAIA school or a high school doing strength and conditioning, and we have a lot to thank in that world for the way that CrossFit brought the snatch and the clean and jerk back to life and back to the prominence in the United States and to a degree across the world. So a lot of it was embracing that and making peace with the fact that CrossFit and weightlifting are different sports, but they're very highly related, and a lot of those clubs became both CrossFits and weightlifting gyms. That's evolving, and in the pandemic, like every sport, had some effects on USA weightlifting and the way that the world worked. With fencing, it's been, kind of a similar thing of like, okay, how do we get more swords into more people's hands? It is a participation based sport, and as is weightlifting. They are very different, but it comes down to how do I get people into the front door of a fencing club?
Yeah.
How do I expand capacity? Because I can't put you in the front door of a fencing club that doesn't exist. So that was why we worked with fencing ventures to find ways to put clubs in markets that need fencing clubs, that look like fencing club markets. You look at there's three or four of those we've opened now, and they're doing really well. And we're looking at markets that look very much like fencing markets that are underutilized, like Chicago and Minneapolis and Paul. And how can we best do that? How can we provide opportunities for Americans abroad to fence and to weightlift? Um, how can we get, why did we do fencing across America? Well, we realized that people who see the Olympics on TV may want to try that. So the idea was we did it during the games, which was a first. No one really does a lot during the games because the focus is all on Paris or London or Rio or wherever that might be. And the theory was you watch the games and then the next day you show up at your local mall. So for you, Meadowhall, or a great football place like a train station. And lo and behold, you can try the sport with an Olympian. And so we had
Yeah.
35,000 people try fencing in under a week.
Incredible.
And we've seen conversion from that.
Yeah.
So this year we redid it so that clubs owned that locally. So it expanded the reach into smaller towns, particularly where we weren't able to reach with fencing across America. And then we're planning again some collaborations on that when we get to 28. That may have not worked in weightlifting.
Mm.
And cities are different. In weightlifting, we were big in the southeastern United States, so that's sort of Atlanta, Florida, Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina, and in California. In weightlifting, we're huge in the Northeast. I've been to probably New York more in 6 months in weightlifting and fencing than I was in the entire time I was in weightlifting because it's a hub city for us.
Yeah,
Boston, same thing. And that's not to say there was no weightlifting in New York. And it's not to say there's no fencing in Atlanta. There is in both cases. But those hub cities and those cultures are very, very different. And you're speaking to different opportunities. People come into fencing because we have college. They want to
yeah,
get into those college programs, particularly at high-end academic institutions like Columbia, Harvard, Notre Dame, and so forth. Fencing, weightlifting doesn't have the NCAA. You're looking at much older athletes. So it's very different tactics and very different things are needed to expand both. But the art is creative thinking of how do we
uh-huh.
reach more people who look like the people who already do our sport, and how do we embrace things that are already working for us. So in weightlifting, that was all about CrossFit. In fencing, that's all about movies. Where have
Yeah.
you seen sword fighting most is probably in movies.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I listened to you talking about kind of the matter of fact nature of what it is that you've been doing across those two NGBs, and again to use your phrase, the G in NGB being kind of the key driver for many other sports seems to be at odds with the way that you do things. You to me sound like a person who's and the other sports, please forgive me, very very commercially minded and very very acutely aware of opportunities, commercial opportunities. Whereas generally speaking, you've got NGBs that run their sport. Is that a fair distinction between yourself and others?
You know, I wouldn't want to say it's a distinction. I think there's others who have done a really, really great job. And I think the answer is balancing, yes, commercial items. We've got to grow the business. Non-profit is a business designation, which means you don't pay tax on your profits. You still need to ultimately have a number in the bottom right-hand corner that's in the black. And you need more money to spend more money on athletes. So in our time too, in both NGBs, we've dramatically increased athlete funding in both.
Mm.
In US fencing, we funded our Paralympic division for the very first time ever. We're funding more folks to go and accompany our senior athletes to the World Championships as training partners, which are generally younger athletes, to get that ability for them. We're funding technology to help our athletes. So and again, that happened in both NGBs. So the difference between us and a for-profit business, let's take, Sheffield, no, I won't take Sheffield Wednesday for now, actually. Let's take Liverpool Football Club and Fenway Group, who own the Boston Red Sox here, Liverpool Football Club, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Their job is to maximize revenue. Their job is also to win championships, but it's a pretty clear guiding light of revenue. We have that same thing. The difference is we have a mission and a vision. So our mission is to grow the sport of fencing, and it's to win medals. How do we put these shiny things around people's necks? So that's where a lot of our money ends up going. And how do we grow our collegiate programs to attract more people in there, have more people, places for people to train post high school age? That's an important part of what we do. So, again, weightlifting slightly different, but it's remembering you're mission based and you're growth based. So you need the business to fund the mission. And I think
Okay.
that's the critical distinction of from what you said, Mark, about being commercially focused. I am. There's no secret about that. But it being commercially focused doesn't mean being a revenue hound. It means being a service hound. It means being a development hound. It means being, yes, a revenue hound. And figuring out how you best serve that community and how you can best bring those dollars to bear in a way that helps your membership, but also in a way that grows that, but also in a way that you get more dollars in the front door to provide your athletes. And there's plenty now of NGB leaders in the United States, at least, that I can point to, and a couple in GB. I know that group less well, who are doing that really well. People like
Yeah.
Amanda Krause at US Rowing, people like Vic Brumfield at US Triathlon, Brendan Quirk at US Cycling, and many others. And I feel unfair in mentioning just as Lili Lung at USA Gymnastics, which went through a tremendously large crisis recently, which a lot of people don't talk about. And it's
Mm.
why? Because Lili did such a good job in turning that organization around. and she'll be the first to tell you there's more work to do. But it's Lily has been phenomenal as an NGB leader and turning that organization into an organization that once again gymnasts can be really proud of, but is
Yeah.
also growing the sport of gymnastics, and is loved by their athletes once again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she should be tremendously complimented for the work that she's done there. You know, Vic at triathlon, and before her, Rocky Harris at triathlon. Again, this great story of an NGB that's really just gone through this great modernization as a sport, and under Rocky and then Vic's leadership, and has been tremendous. Amanda Kraus came into rowing a few years ago. She ran the largest, or I believe the largest foundation for rowing, called Rowing New York.
Okay.
Before she did that, and again, tremendous turnaround's unfair in U.S. rowing, but tremendous achievement at
Yeah.
U.S. rowing in the last 4 or 5 years, I think, since Amanda's been there. And that's just a few examples of people that come to my mind and I talk about often. Matt Farrell, who's just joined U.S. figure skating, he was out of the NGB game for a while, but watching him come in, and the first thing he's doing is doing listening sessions with his staff, with
Hmm.
athletes, with stakeholders, with being out with next to an ice rink plenty of times. That's critical. I did the same thing. I came into fencing. I didn't know much about fencing. It doesn't really happen in an office in Colorado Springs. Certainly doesn't happen in my house in Denver. So, where did I go? I went and visited over 40 clubs around the United States, big, small, east, west, Midwest, and found out about it. And watch, and I think Matt's been there about 3 months, but I think he's going to be tremendous for U.S. figure skating. So there's just a few examples of people doing great things, and I'm no different to them. I'm happy to be named amongst that group if people choose to do so. But there's tremendous leadership now out there in the NGBs. John Dutton at British Cycling, I think, is doing a great job as
Mm,
well.
yeah. Yeah. True.
I think in very difficult circumstances, Jack at UK Athletics has done some really good things recently. There's good examples around the world, and there's plenty, I'm sure, that are not popping into my mind right now.
For sure. You've also launched some award-winning DEI initiatives, refurbishment, the women's mentors, community forums, grace grants. Which so far has had the greatest ripple effect? And what's next? What's on the pipeline?
Look, these DEI has become a hot button topic here in the United States, under new presidential leadership of the country. Um, but certainly a number of these programs, I think, have to be focused on the idea of expanding our reach. And I think that's a misconception people have about DEI. Is DEI, a lot of people misunderstand that DEI, and it can mean this, is essentially positive discrimination,
Hmm.
and similar ways of working. DEI in the sports space can often mean opportunities for folks who wouldn't otherwise be seeing those. So, recently we invested in Nick Aitken Foundation. Nick's a bronze medalist from Paris, LA native. Um, and together with a major donor, we were able to funnel funds into Nick's foundation and start a foundation for folks there in LA. And that addresses the ability to pay for fencing.
Hmm.
We are an expensive sport. I think there's no two ways of looking at it, and finding a different conclusion. But the Nelia Foundation, Peace in New York City, and of course the legendary Peter Westbrook Foundation, started by a six-time Olympian who sadly just passed. Those are really critical elements of fencing to be able as we call it, fence the gap. In other words, the
Yeah.
monetary gap of fencing. And it's particularly acute in the US, more so even than GB or France or Italy, because we're such a large country.
Hmm.
So first of all, before you've left the country, LA to New York City is a 4 hour, 5 hour flight. So, when I moved here, people used to ask me, "Do you go to New York every weekend?" And I used to tell them, "Do you go to Moscow? It's the same distance." Um, but I think that's the critical application of DEI and impact programs in the US.
Mm.
And then also looking at things like the mentor program, mentee program for women's coaches. We have an abundance of great male coaches in the US, and it's really important to support those women's coaches. Some people may feel more comfortable being coached by a woman. Some people may feel that they have a better understanding of them as a female athlete. Some others
Mm.
may not feel that way, but it's important to serve that group who do feel that way. And also to lift up those women to positions where they can run programs, be a head coaches of NCAA programs, run their own club, and those mentors. Yes, I didn't have them in a formal sense like this. Really helped me over the years,
Mm.
and giving that network of people to call is a really important element of that. But Fencing the Gap won the USOPC's DEIB award a couple of years ago, and I think it's probably our cornerstone program at this point
Yeah,
of
yeah,
how we deal with the financial gap. But there's other areas that come into this, our outreach programs to parks and recreation. So, for British listeners, there's not really a good equivalency, but it's sort of similar to the Sport and Recreation Alliance
yep, yep,
that different counties and towns might do. That often comes into this same area. So it's DIB. I think the summary of it is, how do you reach more people about the sport? How do you bring more people who don't fit into your dead center of the bat standard way of working,
mm.
which ultimately generally is a pretty affluent one. I think the foundations are a very effective way of doing that. We're super happy to partner with Nick. We're looking for others that might want to do the same thing. And it takes the people, though. That's what I've learned. There's foundations in other sports. Weightlifting had one called Coastal Empire Weightlifting in Savannah, Georgia. Another one called Live for Life in St. Louis were also tremendously impactful. But it's because of Kerry Goodrich. It was because of Jimmy Duke. It was the same thing up in the PWF has done a really good job, Peter Westbrook Foundation, in both expanding sport in New York City, but also getting high performers onto Olympic teams. And that was almost entirely because of Peter's own determination, vision, and ultimately, to some extent, in his case, charisma.
Yep.
And Peast, which is run by Nzinga Prescott, an Olympian, now Hall of Fame member. Nzinga's organization is essentially a child of Peter's Foundation. She came up
Okay.
through Peter's Foundation, has now started her own in Brooklyn. The Nelia Foundation in Atlanta is helping folks in Atlanta. And then, again, we had this idea with our donor bill, to make a foundation, particularly one that targeted LA if it could happen. And, by a coincidence, Nick emails me about 2 weeks later and says, I'm looking to start my own foundation. Can you help? And it was like a gift dropping in, because, the Nick Itkin Foundation is perfect. They have their own venue. They have a straight bus stop from downtown LA, which is where they're targeting. And they have a club adjacent to them, just the same way the other foundations I meant do, to help with it. And it was just a really wonderful coming together. And of course, it's early days, but they've had their first athletes in there. They started in April when we had our North American Cup Series in LA.
Mm.
But that could easily grow into the best thing we've done with
Yeah.
this area of expanding reach. And I hope that we can find somebody to do a similar thing in the Dallas Fort Worth area or here in Denver. I should say Denver has the Denver Fencing Foundation, which is more specific to the Paralympic side, which is also doing a
Okay.
good job. But
Yep.
you find those right people in those right cities, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, Speaking of achievements, at Paris, USA fencing tied for most goals.
We
Goals,
did.
and as you mentioned earlier, whilst that was all happening, you hosted 35,000 tri fencing events. What's taking Paris as an example? What's your proudest moment from those games?
You know, Paris was a roaring success in terms of the Olympic Games, particularly obviously in women's foil. We were greedy. We wanted a little bit more, and of course we wanted to take every opportunity we had. But over the years I've learned it is certainly true you miss all of the shots you don't take, but you want to make every single one. So it's, I'm in other sports. I think Mo Salah had a 19.1% success rate on shots, which is pretty good for Liverpool last year. And I don't know what Leon Dreisaitl's numbers in hockey are, but I would imagine they're an equal percentage. So in other words, we miss a lot of shots.
Yeah.
And we went in with a phenomenally well-performing year, uh, of which our athletes can be rightly proud. And have one or two where they may want to come back in 28 and attack that again.
Mhm.
But look, we've had some tremendous on-field of play. We had Eli Dershowitz won the World Championship in 2023 going into the games. We had this great run with our Sabre team. We've had, our men's and women's foil team have both won medals consistently, and of course you can't go any further without talking about Lee Kiefer, consistently world number one, now Olympic and world champion as we sit here, world team and Olympic team champion for her and Lauren Scruggs. Lauren, by the way, came through the Peter Westbrook Foundation I mentioned
Uh,
earlier, went to Harvard
okay.
University, interned with Bank of America, and it's been great to see fencing be such a big part of her journey.
Yeah.
But look, you can't do much in terms of amplifying without that success. So yeah, and we were in the Grand Palais. I mean, the Grand Palais is this beautiful palace, literally in downtown Paris. And we've had World Championships there. We had the Olympics there, so you can't ask for a better venue.
Okay.
LA has to really do a good job with the LA Convention Center to get even close. No offense to dear friends in Los Angeles. But look, I think it would be unfair to say I wasn't extremely proud of an all US final.
Mm.
Extremely proud of the team beating Italy is not quite unheard of, but is a huge feat. That isn't quite a giant killing. That is world number one and world number two in the world. But it's in recent terms, in like the Premier League, to give you a good example, it's like taking down Manchester City.
Yeah.
It's they are the power.
Yeah.
And to come in and see Ralph Bistorff as coach, create a culture in that team that he did, and to see the athletes pull it off in the way that they did. And it wasn't just Lee Kiefer leading, from the front. Lee is amazing, taking out
Mm.
away from her, but that was a team. It was Jackie Dubrovich, it was Maya Weintraub, it was Lauren Scruggs, and Lauren actually closes that team. So it's called an anchor, which is you typically put your best athlete last. That's sort of the conventional thinking, and I
Terrifying.
think, yeah, and I think most would humbly agree that Lee is our number one athlete. I think even the rest of the team would very much agree with that statement. But we close with Lauren Scruggs, and it means that she's usually facing the best athlete on the other team. So and there was one I will tell you, one element that we had there that gave me heartburn. I'm in the stands at this point, remember, and in the final against Italy, the unbeatable world number one team, not unbeatable, but you know arguably favourites in that group. We put in Maya Weintraub for Jackie Dubrovich. Jackie's our experienced, very much almost team captain character, and Maya comes in. And I'm going, we're doing well here. We're ahead of Italy. It was this wise, and she then went on a tear against the Italians she faced, and arguably was probably MVP of that final.
Mm.
And sure enough, it was great. And Jackie did great in her legs as well. She was doing fine. It was a good substitution. I wouldn't be telling the story if it wasn't. But
Yeah.
it was actually a stroke of genius by Ralph and his assistant coach for that particular bout, Brian. So I think it would be hard to look away from the team gold and indeed the all foil final as an exceptionally proud moment. Nick winning bronze as well, going into a hometown games in LA. But it was also the way that we raised the ships for fencing as part of that. The the way that our team, led by Brian Wendell and our partners at Finn Partners, raised the profile of fencing and did so by again asking. We had more, I believe, more fencers on both ABC Good Morning America, which for British listeners is kind of like ITV's This Morning.
Yeah.
It's the number one rated morning show in America. Um, and more on CNN, which you get CNN in the UK, so no need to explain that one,
Hmm.
than any other sport. And it was because every time we won a medal or something happened, we were going to them saying, "Hello, would you like to, feature Lee Kiefer or Lauren Scruggs or Maya Weintraub or Nick Itkin?" And we even got a lot of our non-medalists on there. The US and indeed the UK are very competitive markets,
Yeah.
and you have to be ready to go. You have to be understanding that it's not like some of our colleagues in other countries where you win one bronze medal, you're a national hero.
Mm.
It's up to us, USA Fencing, to put our athletes in the spotlight, whether that's advocating with the USOPC or with media folks. I think that was a big win over the games, where we came out the other side with, blasting on all cylinders, and I think we're still riding that high from the games in the way that people have come into our clubs, the membership records, the record sponsorship, the new academy we've just founded out in Boston with Cognita, which is a British company, by the way. It's our last day of our financial year today as we're speaking, and I listed out, I think it was something like 26 different things that we did this year that were unheard of records, new programs that our team of 20 people has achieved. It includes some of the athletic
Incredible.
side of it as well. And let me be clear, the athletes and their personal coaches take the absolute credit for those achievements, not us. We're part of it, sure, and we're happy to support them, but it's them who does it on the field of play, and we're really lucky to have that. But just seeing that wave of positive and good news come out of a year after the games, especially with some challenges that we've had. It's no
Yeah.
secret that we've had challenges with USA Fencing and the administration of the United States, and we're at the end of that now, we hope. But that was a large distraction in us being able to do what we're here to do, which is grow fencing, support our members, and support our athletes to win medals on the field of play. But yeah, I
Absolutely.
think Paris was very positive. I think the USOPC and NBC did a really good job together. Obviously, the Paris Olympic and Paralympic Organizing Committee.
Yeah, it was great.
I think it was in many ways was a make or break games. I feel like it's the first games that really rivaled London.
Mm.
As a London adjacent person, a somewhat adopted Londoner, I'm not sure I can ever admit that the games was better than London, but I can admit it was really good.
Yeah.
So it was, and the way that NBC and Jess Park and her team in USOPC growth really integrated folks like Snoop Dogg and Bam Adebayo and Flavor Flav into what we were
Yeah, really
doing was
bright.
really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really fun way of doing it. So, and it's carried on. So, Nick Itkin, I mentioned earlier, he just did a collaboration yesterday with Bruce Lee,
Huh.
who used to fence when he was a kid. So,
Okay.
and you're probably going to see a few more of those things with us, with people who've been heavily involved in fencing
Yeah.
over the years, and or have got an affiliation with fencing. So, if you're a music fan, Iron Maiden.
Huh.
Bruce Dickinson is a quite serious fencer. He's actually
Seriously?
tried to qualify a number of yeah. The problem is all of his opponents have issues because either he fences Wicker Man or people run for the hills. So that's Bruce's issues. But he's a legitimate fencer. He trains both in the UK and here when he's in various places. And I believe he has actually qualified a couple of times for the Veteran World Championships for GB.
Wow.
So Daniel Day-Lewis used to fence, another British actor.
Yeah.
David Heyman, producer of Harry Potter, fenced.
Huh.
You've got a lot of people in Hollywood for various different roles have fenced and carried it on. Um, so Neil Diamond, as in Sweet Caroline Neil Diamond, was
Wow.
captain of the fencing team at New York University. So there's quite a few out there who have got affiliations or history with fencing or just an affection for it through through their career.
Yeah, it's a real alumni. Um, Speaking of the achievements, that what were they? 26 achievements this year, which is I can't, my math is terrible, so I'm not sure how many that is a month, but that's quite a lot of work. You seem to, listening to you over the past hour or so, you seem to thrive on doing the impossible. Like it feels like nothing is not attainable for you. So how would you define what impossible is? How do you go about this?
There are things that are impossible, but I have a catchphrase which I use a little less now than I used to, but it's called "It Can Be Done." And it came out of when I came to weightlifting. I had a lot of people pull me aside and say something along the lines of they'll never be successful, they'll never win medals, they'll never grow, it's a hopeless place. And it was not. The first thing I looked at was, yeah, there was a lot of doping problems in weightlifting, and they've been blamed carte blanche for the reasons why USA weightlifting had not done well on the field of play. My view was that's the number, we've got to go beat it. It's up to us
Mm,
to find how. And part of that was aggressively fighting doping on the world stage.
okay,
That fight continues today under Matt Sicchio's leadership and under Ursula Garza Papandreou's leadership on the international level, and they're doing a great job. But Matt, not coincidentally, came from USADA, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, to run USA
okay.
weightlifting. So he's very passionate about that. He was a great choice as my successor, and I've enjoyed watching him do well with USA weightlifting since. But that, yes, the doping side was part of that fight, sure. But it was a large part of how do we encourage competition in the US? How do we generate
Mm,
a whole system based around improvement? And we really did that. And you talk about Paris, and actually, some of my most proud moments in Paris were actually not from an NGB I worked for at the time. They were from US weightlifting. And watching Mary Thiessen and she did not win a medal, but she came close. Compete for the US. That came through our recruitment program that was generated by Susie Sanchez and Mike Gatton.
super cool.
And watching Olivia Reeves, who I watched come through the youth ranks, go and win a gold medal for the US. Something when I showed up at weightlifting was a pipe dream at absolute best. Standing in Rio in similar ways with standing next to Zygmunt Smallshares and others and Tim Swords, watching our flag raise when Sarah Robles won our first medal in many years. It was a bronze medal, but that meant so much to us. And then she
Mm,
went on to win the world championship the year after when we hosted it in Anaheim. Another thing that you don't host a world twice. We haven't hosted it in 50 years. Well, we did it in 15 and 17. You can't get somebody, or especially a woman, into the leadership of the IWF. Well, guess what? Ursula was there, and she's still there, and she was the interim president for a while. And that was the message of actually it was a Unite group. A guy called Nathan Goddard was the guy who pointed out to me. I said, "Why do you keep setting me these impossible targets? Nothing's ever good enough." He goes, "Because the one way that you're most motivated is by telling me you can't do something." And it's
oh,
I was like, he's got a point. It's so that's the interesting world that kind of I've lived in is trying to prove people wrong. We're just
yeah,
about to put fencing on national television for the first time next year. People told me that couldn't happen.
yeah,
You can't build a sponsorship business, a legitimate one in USA fencing. Sure enough, we have. And there's been a lot of that is just taking the mindset of it can be done, really should be, it can be done, comma, provided it's actually possible. But
mm,
there are things that are impossible. There are, and it can be done as an approach of, okay, let's look at the at every possible way we can to skin this cat to
yeah,
get to that end goal. We know where we want to go. Let's figure it out.
okay,
We're at fencing. We're adding universities to school to our fencing programs. No one else is doing that. It's because at the moment people are scared about losing the programs. We are too. Don't get me
mm,
wrong, but you're going out there and actually saying, okay, we want to expand our fencing programs. Can we do that in a uncertain time, like House versus NCA? Well, yes, because there's a thing called the enrollment cliff. So there's still universities who need enrollment, and fencing is a great way to do that. We know
Mm.
it's a great way to do that. Let's go out and do that. Building a college recruitment system. Well, there's a lot of systems out there, but fencing is too small a market for them. Well, guess what? We're fencing. It's not too small a market for us. Going and finding a partner, I don't know if you know them, that can help build that at an affordable rate for us where we can make it work financially, figuring out a business model that works for it, that works as a service and as a revenue driver, so everybody wins. Takes thought and time, but again, rather than just dropping that project and go, well, we can't do it, then finding the right ways to do it. That's the spirit of it. It can
Yeah.
be done.
Yeah.
And we learned some of that, by the way, from British cycling.
Mm.
British cycling, we learned three things, and we sat down with Sir David Brailsford. Two of my colleagues did, went with British cycling back in 17, and we learned a few things. One was a lot of the answers lie within your own membership. You talked about my CEO Advisory Council. That's that lesson.
Mm.
One was progress, not perfection. And I've lived by that mantra. I really have. And I repeat it to all of the people who work for me, my board, who I work with, many, 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 many of those things. And I really do think that's the number one thing we learned from them. But it was
Yeah.
also about how do we best address the it can be done principle. And I think that's what David Brailsford really did in Project Rainbow.
Hmm.
If you look at the history of how that happened, and it's a Clive Woodward with England rugby as well back in the day, so
Mm.
it's there's a study out there called SPLIS, SPLSS, which is essentially the study of the same thing. And it's like 92 methods of making a performance organization great. And we didn't do all of them, but we did a fair amount. And it's, a famous quote from Brailsford specifically is around the improvement by incremental gains.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And it's,
Yeah.
and it's such, and Spliff speaks to it as well. It's looking at everything. How can we make this a little better? How can we make this a little better? And sure enough, it all adds up. But it can be done. It's not just about, okay, it's impossible. Can we do it? It's about that of okay, that didn't work. Fine, we learn. Let's try this. And
Yeah.
and that's been successful. And at times it's been unsuccessful. Failure is a part of progress, not perfection. Failure is a part of it can be done. We've hit
Hmm.
the button and I don't know or we screwed up are fine answers, providing they're not the answer every time. And I think embracing that is really important in any sport leadership role, any company leadership role,
Yeah.
actually, and giving your people space to fail. A colleague of mine yesterday rang me and said, Phil, I made a mistake. And that mistake cost us a little bit of money as an organization. I wasn't mad. I was like, you made a mistake. Cool. Let's go. What do we do now? And how do we fix it? How do we move on? And it was great. I really appreciated it, and I'm not going to name who it was or what it was, just because I don't want to out them on a beyond the private conversation.
Yeah.
But the fact he was willing to make that phone call and just raise his hand and say, "Hey, I screwed up here," but hopefully the reason he was willing to do that was knowing that my reaction was not going to be, "You're an idiot, you're fired,"
Yeah.
any type of put down. It was like, "Cool, I really appreciate the call, appreciate the honesty. Let's get it fixed, move on."
Back to the culture thing again. Yeah. Yeah. So, are you a fan of kind of, the fail fast mantra, which is, try something, learn the lessons quickly. If it doesn't work out, move on to the next thing, or iterate and move on. Kind of, is that your
It's
approach?
iterate, yes. The fail fast I could be better at. There are times when I've got a bit between my teeth and we're going over there. The downside of some of the approaches I talked about earlier is we're going over there. There's the goal. I'm finding out how I get there. If I can't go around the mountain, I'm going to go over the mountain. If I can't go over the mountain, I'm going to go through the mountain. It's that's part of it.
Yeah.
And there are times when if I was to criticize myself a little bit with an idea or somewhere to go that I think is really somewhere we need to go, I could be faster to say, this is not working. Let's drop this.
Okay.
And it is an important skill. it's also an important leadership skill to where you surround yourself with people who are not exactly the same as you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm lucky enough to have that. So and so I have others in my team who are quicker to say that. So my job is to go, you're right. But iterating certainly, like this didn't work. We're going to change it. We're going to test it again, and do something different. And of course, you've got to be conscious of budget. You've got to be conscious of time.
Mm.
But to some extent, yes. Let's figure out the way of working. Let's tweak things to a greater extent. And I always believe as well, somewhat alongside that, that simple is often the best answer rather than complexity.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Okay, thank you. Well, so what's next? I mean, what are you've obviously done a lot. This has been a busy year. You've had a busy few years. What are the ambitions for, let's say, up to 2028 and beyond, in participation, performance tech, community? Where are you headed next?
You mean personally, or with USA Fencing, or
Both.
all of the above?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, USA Fencing, we're in the middle of a 4-year strategic plan project. We've ticked off a lot of those. As we go into the next year, the NCAA Women's Championship we haven't talked about. We'll see the first one of those. We'll see an expansion of the Fencing Ventures project. I'm seeing more of those coming in. We'll see the recruitment into the first ever high school, private high school we just announced this morning. And seeing that come together, the design of that and hiring of the coaches into it's going to be an important
Great.
item. How does TV work for us? Does it work for us? Question mark. There's still a question mark over that. Is that a good thing?
Mm.
We'll see the launch, I hope, of our Follow the Fence streaming program. We're diving into an expansion of our merchandise. That was something we bought in house and then repackaged. And we're doing a great amount of designer collaborations and collaborations with our athletes and driving all money to them. So that's been
Mm.
really fun. We're certainly driving towards an expansion still of our collegiate opportunities, and the road to 70,000 members. So we did a lot of that work this year. So I think it's a lot of continued work on that and expanding
Okay.
fencing. We start planning for LA 28. I was in California this week, and part of that was looking at our hospitality house and what we might do around that. Being out in front of that, it's again, you have to remember we are friends but competitors with a lot of our colleagues, not just in the US but across the world.
Mm.
And starting to make plans for how we're going to leverage and market 28 as well. What's fencing across America look like in Los Angeles? We'll be hosting international events this year as well. So a lot of things going on with that. Personally, again, I came in as a turnaround project. I think it's no secret here at US Fencing. I've developed a really great team around me. So identifying who the next leader of that team is likely to be that internal or external, and I'm working with both my board and external mentors to help those people be ready. And I made no secret that I will likely leave US Fencing after the Los Angeles games. So
Hmm.
I'm also on that lookout for what's next for me. Where is that in the NGB space? Is it outside of it? Is it in the US? Is it back in GB? Is it in
Hmm.
Canada? Is it in the pro sport world? Is it in collegiate sport? It's where's the challenge show up? And who needs my skill set? And I think it's one of the things I learned at US weightlifting was, um, there is in NGB land. I think there's a timeline of leadership where you make a difference.
Mm.
Particularly with my style of innovative sort of change management leadership. That you know there's a chance I might stay a little bit after LA 28, but certainly I think that 1 to 6 year mantra that I had coming in made sense, and I think it still makes sense. And but a maximum of 8. You don't want to be
Yeah.
getting into the double digits leading a national governing body,
Hmm.
um, especially through change. And if you look at Lily just stepping away after, sure enough, 6 or 7 years, I think it is, at
Yeah.
USA Gymnastics, same thing. She's stepping away at the top. She's stepping away having done a world-class job.
Mm.
And I think she's right to do it. Kevin Klipstein is stepping away at squash and giving 2 year run into the games. I think that takes a lot of courage on his part because that was I don't know for sure, but I think that was one of Kevin's dreams to see squash in the Olympic Games, and I think he was a big. I know he was a big part of it.
Mm,
So he should take great pride in showing up in Los Angeles in 2028 and watching squash be contested at the Olympic Games for the very
sure.
first time and knowing he had a big part in that. Not terribly dissimilar to the way I watched Hamp and Olivia and Wes and Mary and so on and Jordan at the Olympic Games for weightlifting. I wasn't part
Mm,
of it for that moment, but it was very personally meaningful. I think it'd be the same for Kevin. He stepped away after 20 years, but I think he's doing the right thing for the organization going forward. So you've got to remember as a leader, part of it, like Kevin and like Lily, is understanding what that right time is. And I think that is somewhere in that sort of, you know, I've been here 3 years now. I think we've made an impact. I think by the time I've been double that, well, I've probably done what I needed to do. So yeah,
okay.
it's where's the next opportunity? What's exciting? Who needs my skill set? Who comes a calling? And like I said at the very beginning, go back to 14-year-old me and tell them I would have ran, frankly, most of the
Yeah.
organizations I've been involved with, but especially US fencing. I'm not sure that 14-year-old knows what you're talking about. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it might be I genuinely do run a circus.
But I'm sure you'd be brilliant at even that. Um, this has been great, Phil. I want to, if you're comfortable with it, move into close out with a rapid fire session
Yep.
with you. Okay, let's go. Favorite leadership quote you live by?
Uh, Progress, not perfection. So David Brailsford.
Thank you. Where do you go for inspiration outside sport?
Uh, I think there's a lot of crossover between general business and sport. There's also, if you think about my role, I think entertainment has a lot to offer as well. And indeed, the crossover, the sort of UFC, certainly the WWE of the world, who are in both of those places. I think there's a lot to be learned from what people are doing well in various worlds, business, entertainment, especially music industry, especially. One of my favorite people on my CEO advisory council, it runs Merlin, which is the publisher for all of the independent record labels.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Wow.
Guy called Jeremy Sirota. They have an office in London as well,
Yeah.
and he has a lot of similarities to what I do, and we've
Okay.
learned. I think I definitely learned from him. I will say differently whether he's learned from me. I don't know, but it's been Jeremy is a favorite person to exchange ideas with. Even law what's new in law and that world is interesting to me. So
Mm,
um, I'd say I don't really have a great quick fire answer to that, but I'd say keep your ears and eyes open, keep watching the business news, and be willing to reach out to people who you think are doing really great things.
yeah, yeah. Okay. And finally, what advice would you give to your younger self back in Essex or your early NGB days?
2 ears, one mouth. I probably still need that advice on occasion.
Yeah, brilliant. Phil, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate having you on. Great chat. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Cheers.